My daughter stepped in front of the conference room door before I could reach it. Without a word, she placed a white envelope on the polished oak table between us. She folded her arms. "Your key card stops working after today," she said, her voice calm enough to cut straight through me. "You're fired." Silence swallowed the room. No one reached for a coffee cup. No one shuffled a single page. 8 people sat around that table. People who had watched me build Walker furniture from a dusty one-room workshop into one of Ohio's most respected family businesses. Not one of them could meet my eyes. I rested my fingertips on the envelope, but left it unopened. Instead, I looked at my daughter. Emily still had her father's blue eyes, but the little girl who used to fall asleep on fabric samples while I finished payroll was gone. The woman standing in front of me looked like a stranger wearing her face. "I'd like to know why," I said quietly. She didn't hesitate. "The company needs younger leadership." A chair creaked somewhere across the table. Richard, our company attorney, clenched his jaw. He wanted to speak. I could see it, but he stayed silent. Emily kept going. "You've been holding this company back for years." Holding it back. The words echoed louder than anything else in the room. 42 years, 14-hour days, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, nights wondering how we'd make payroll before worrying about whether we could pay our own mortgage. Holding it back. "I understand," I said. She slid another folder toward me. "Your retirement package. I retired 2 years ago. This makes it official." Every answer sounded rehearsed, every pause, every sentence. Someone had prepared her for this. Someone wanted her to believe every word she was saying. I slipped both envelopes into my purse without reading them. "If that's everything." Emily nodded toward the door. "Security will escort you downstairs." For the first time, someone else spoke. One of the older directors cleared his throat. "Emily, I don't think that's necessary." She never even looked at him. "It absolutely is." That hurt more than losing my job. Security. As if I were about to steal office supplies on my way out. As if 42 years meant nothing. I smiled anyway. Not because I was all right, because I refused to let her watch me fall apart. "I know where the elevator is." No one stopped me. No one apologized. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. Employees looked up from their desks. The moment they saw me, they looked away. News travels fast inside a family business. By the time I reached the lobby, everyone already knew. The young receptionist stood so quickly her chair rolled backward. Her eyes were red. I'm so sorry." I squeezed her trembling hand. "Take care of yourself." She tried to answer. Nothing came out. Outside, a cold spring rain blurred the parking lot. I sat inside my old SUV without turning the engine on. For several minutes, I simply listened to the rain striking the windshield. Then I opened the envelope. Termination papers. Immediate revocation of company access. Health insurance canceled. Office privileges revoked. Company vehicle surrendered. Cold.efficient. As if I were nothing more than another expense being removed from a balance sheet. Then one sentence stopped me. Ownership interests remain unchanged. I read it again. Slower. Ownership interests remain unchanged. Why include that? If they truly believed I no longer mattered, why make sure that sentence stayed in the paperwork? My phone vibrated before I could think it through. "Richard," I answered immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've had better mornings." Silence. Long enough to make my stomach tighten. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't have been fired today." I stared through the rain-covered windshield. "Then why didn't you stop it?" "I couldn't." "Richard, I couldn't." The way he repeated it chilled me. "Why not?" Another pause. "Then, because someone has been lying to your daughter." Every muscle in my body went still. "What are you talking about?" "I can't explain over the phone." Richard, just tell me. The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Call ended. I called him back immediately. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Richard wasn't dramatic. In 30 years, I'd never heard fear in his voice. Today, I had. My firing suddenly felt like the smallest part of something much bigger. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence gave my thoughts too much room. The farmhouse greeted me exactly as I'd left it that morning. Quiet. Still. My late husband's work boots waited beside the back door. 3 years had passed since he died. I still couldn't bring myself to move them. People told me keeping them there wasn't healthy. Maybe they were right. But every time I looked at those worn leather boots, I could almost hear him walking through the kitchen after another long day at the factory. I made a cup of coffee I never intended to drink. The termination papers covered the kitchen table. Again, my eyes found the same sentence. Ownership interests remain unchanged. What aren't you telling me, Emily? The question escaped before I realized I'd spoken aloud. Almost without thinking, I walked down the hallway toward my husband's office. The room had remained untouched for months. His leather chair still sat neatly beneath the desk. His reading glasses rested beside the unfinished sketch of a dining table he'd been designing before his heart gave out. Dust covered everything. I brushed my fingers across the desktop. I could really use your advice today. As I turned to leave, sunlight broke through the storm clouds for only a heartbeat. The beam caught something metallic on the highest shelf of the bookcase. A flash. Gone. I frowned. I reached up carefully, my fingers wrapped around a small steel lockbox. I'd never seen it before. A faded strip of masking tape stretched across the lid. 5 handwritten words stared back at me. For my wife. Only if necessary. My pulse began to pound. Necessary. Had he known this day would come? I searched every drawer until I found a tiny brass key taped beneath the desk. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. Click. The lid lifted. Inside sat several neatly organized folders. Stock certificates, legal documents, a sealed letter with my name written across the front, and a flash drive. My eyes went first to the stock certificates. The numbers didn't make sense. I counted them once, then again. A third time. My breathing slowed. No. That couldn't be possible. Years before he died. Thomas had quietly transferred additional voting shares into my name. Enough to. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the house, slow, urgent. I closed the box and walked to the front door. Richard stood. On the porch, soaked by the rain, clutching a thick leather folder against his chest. Before speaking, he glanced over both shoulders as if someone had followed him. The moment I stepped aside, he hurried inside and shut the door. They're planning to sell the company, he said. Then his eyes landed on the stock certificates spread across my kitchen table. The color drained from his face. You found them. He looked back at me, almost unable to breathe. My God. His voice dropped to a whisper. They have absolutely no idea. He swallowed hard. That you own the final controlling shares. The courthouse buzzed with ordinary life the next morning. Lawyers hurried past with overstuffed briefcases. Coffee cups changed hands. Phones rang. No one seemed to notice that my own daughter was about to stand before a judge and argue that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. Richard walked beside me without saying a word. Only when we reached the courtroom doors did he stop. One last thing. I looked at him. They're expecting you to lose your temper. I won't. They're counting on grief. I buried my husband. He nodded. They're counting on anger. I buried that too. For the first time that morning, Richard smiled. Good. He opened the courtroom door. Courtroom 4B was already filling. I spotted Emily immediately. She sat at the petitioner's table, staring at a stack of papers she clearly wasn't reading. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. For one painful second, I didn't see the CEO who had fired me. I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap after scraping her knee. Then Daniel Mercer leaned toward her. He whispered something. Emily straightened. The softness disappeared. By the time she looked up, her expression had become unreadable again. She never looked at me. That hurt more than yesterday. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered. Everyone stood. After the formalities, she adjusted her glasses and opened the file. This petition requests that the court appoint a temporary conservator over Mrs. Walker's financial and business affairs. She looked directly at Emily. Ms. Walker, this is an extraordinary request. I trust you understand that. Emily rose. I do, Your Honor. Her voice trembled just enough to sound believable. Too believable. My mother has become increasingly forgetful over the past year. I folded my hands together. No reaction. She misplaces important documents. Lie. She forgets meetings. Lie. She's become vulnerable to manipulation. Richard quietly wrote something on his legal pad. Daniel never took his eyes off the judge. Emily continued. I believe she's no longer able to protect the company she built. Protect the company. The words landed like a punch. I'd spent 42 years protecting that company. Now my own daughter believed I needed protection from myself. Judge Hayes nodded. Thank you. She turned toward Daniel. Mr. Mercer. Daniel stood with effortless confidence. Tailored suit, perfect posture, measured smile. Everything about him looked trustworthy. That was his greatest weapon. I've worked closely with Mrs. Walker over the last 8 months. He paused just long enough to seem reluctant. Unfortunately, I've witnessed several incidents that raised serious concerns. What kind of incidents? The judge asked. Daniel sighed. The performance was flawless. Mrs. Walker repeatedly confused financial reports during board meetings. Another lie. She asked the same questions multiple times. Lie. She became suspicious of loyal employees without cause. Richard leaned closer. Listen carefully. I'm listening. He's creating a pattern. No. I kept watching Daniel. He's telling a story. And stories are easier to believe than facts. Daniel reached for a neatly organized folder. Everything inside was tabbed, color-coded. Prepared. Almost too prepared. He handed copies to the judge. I documented every incident. Dates, meeting notes, emails, witness statements. At first glance, it looked devastating. Almost impossible to challenge. Almost. Richard stood. Permission to cross-examine. The judge nodded. He walked toward Daniel without carrying a single document. Just a pen. Sometimes confidence made a stronger statement than paperwork. Mr. Mercer. Daniel smiled politely. Yes? You've testified that Mrs. Walker has shown signs of cognitive decline. Correct. How long have you known her? About 8 months? And before that? I did not. So, your opinion about a woman who built one of Ohio's most successful furniture companies is based on 8 months of observation? Daniel hesitated. Yes. Richard nodded as though satisfied. You also testified that Mrs. Walker became confused during financial presentations. I did. Who prepared those presentations? My department. So every report she questioned came from you. Daniel shifted slightly. Yes. Richard let the silence grow uncomfortable. You described her questions as confusion. That's right. What if they weren't confusion? Daniel frowned. I don't understand. What if she questioned the reports because she suspected something was wrong? Daniel didn't answer. Richard stepped closer. Did that possibility ever occur to you? It wasn't supported by the facts. Richard smiled. Let's talk about facts. He lifted a printed email. This came directly from the company server. Daniel's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Do you recognize it? I'd need to read it. Richard looked toward the judge. Permission? Judge Hayes nodded. Richard handed Daniel a copy. Please read the highlighted sentence. Daniel's eyes moved across the page. His expression changed, only for a second. But I caught it. So did Richard. He already knew what was coming. Daniel cleared his throat. I don't recall sending this. Richard looked genuinely surprised. You don't? No. Richard turned toward the judge. Perhaps reading it aloud will refresh his memory. Daniel remained silent. Richard read it himself. Once the old guard is gone, the sale becomes much easier. The courtroom froze. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a heartbeat. Judge Hayes slowly looked up. Mr. Mercer? Daniel forced a laugh. That's being taken out of context. Wonderful. Richard nodded. Let's add some context. He held up a second document. The email was sent to Horizon National Furnishings. Whispers spread through the gallery. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard continued. The company currently attempting to purchase Walker Furniture. Daniel straightened in his chair. It was part of exploratory discussions. Were those discussions authorized by the board? Silence. Were they authorized by Mrs. Walker? Silence. Were they authorized by Ms. Walker? Daniel finally answered. No. So you negotiated with an outside buyer. Richard took another step. Without the knowledge of the company's founder. Another step. Without the approval of its CEO. Another. And now you're asking this court to believe Mrs. Walker became suspicious for no reason. Daniel's confidence cracked. Barely. But it cracked. I was acting in the company's best interest. Richard smiled. That's your opinion? He returned to counsel table. I have no further questions. For several seconds, no one spoke. I finally looked at Emily. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Daniel, then at the email, then back at Daniel. Confusion replaced certainty. A tiny crack had appeared. She hadn't known. Not about the emails, not about Horizon, not about any of it. The judge called for a 20-minute recess. People filtered into the hallway, speaking in hushed voices. Richard gathered his papers. That landed harder than I expected. It wasn't enough. No. He glanced toward Daniel. But it's the first time he's had to improvise. Across the hallway, Emily stood alone. Daniel had disappeared. She looked lost. After a long moment, she walked toward me. She stopped several feet away. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Mom. One word. The first she'd spoken to me without sounding like a CEO. I searched her face. Did you really believe I'd lose my mind overnight? She looked down. I was told. I know. I thought I was protecting the company. I nodded slowly. From me? She couldn't answer. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did. Her shoulders slumped. I know. For a moment, she looked 12 years old again. I don't know what to believe anymore. Before I could answer, Daniel's voice cut through the hallway. There you are. He approached with his usual polished smile. The moment he saw me, it tightened. Just slightly. Mrs. Walker. I believe it's Ms. Walker to you. His smile didn't move. He turned to Emily. We need to prepare for the afternoon session. She stayed exactly where she was. Emily. Nothing. His voice sharpened. We need to go. Still, she didn't move. For the first time since I'd met Daniel Mercer. He looked uneasy. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Emily's face change. Fear, not anger. Fear. After a long pause, she nodded and walked away beside him. I watched them disappear around the corner. Richard joined me. Well? She's starting to question him. Do you think she'll keep asking questions? I kept my eyes on Daniel's back. He won't give her time. Richard frowned. You think he'll pressure her? I shook my head. No. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I think he'll panic. At that exact moment, Richard's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Every trace of color drained from his face. What happened? He swallowed. The shareholder meeting. What about it? They moved it. My pulse quickened. It was scheduled for Friday. I know. When? Richard looked straight at me. Tomorrow morning. I stared at him. Why? His answer came quietly. Because someone just realized they're running out of time. As we hurried back toward the courtroom, neither of us noticed a maintenance worker removing a security camera from the hallway ceiling. The camera had recorded a conversation no one was ever supposed to hear. And someone had just made sure it disappeared. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas sitting at his drafting table, pencil tucked behind one ear, reminding me that a company was never built with lumber alone. It was built with people. By sunrise, Richard's car was already in my driveway. He climbed out carrying a laptop under one arm and a thick binder under the other. The look on his face told me he hadn't slept either. I think we know why Daniel moved the shareholder meeting. I stepped aside. Come in. The coffee had barely finished, brewing before he spread papers across my kitchen table. What happened? One of the IT managers called me after yesterday's hearing. I frowned. Why him? Richard opened the binder. Because Daniel ordered him to permanently delete several company emails. A chill crept up my spine. Did he? He tried. Richard slid a printed report toward me. He didn't know the servers create automatic backups every night. For the first time since all this began, I felt something shift. Daniel wasn't just lying. He was covering his tracks. Richard handed me the first recovered email. Read this. The sender made my stomach tighten. From Daniel Mercer to Horizon National Furnishings. Subject: voting control. The message itself was painfully short. Emily believes she controls the company. She has no idea the remaining certificates still exist. Once the conservatorship is approved, the final obstacle disappears. I lowered the page. He knew. Richard nodded. He knew exactly who owned the deciding shares. And he never told Emily. He couldn't. Why not? Because the second she found out, Richard said quietly, she would have started asking questions he couldn't answer. I looked back at the email. Every word had been calculated. He wasn't advising Emily. He was using her. Richard reached for another document. This one's even worse. I unfolded it. Another email, another private conversation, another lie. Once the acquisition closes, my consulting agreement begins immediately. Attached beneath it was a contract worth several $1,000,000. Guaranteed salary, executive title. Bonuses. Stock options. I stared at the numbers. So this was never about saving Walker Furniture. Richard slowly shook his head. No. It was about selling it. And getting rich in the process. The room fell silent. For months, Daniel had wrapped greed in the language of responsibility. He'd convinced my daughter she was rescuing the company when he was quietly auctioning it off. Before either of us spoke again, my phone rang. Emily. Richard looked at the screen. So soon? I answered. Hello? For a moment. Nothing, only breathing. Then, Mom. Her voice cracked. I need to see you. I closed my eyes. Where are you? My office. Another pause. Please. One word. No speeches, no rehearsed confidence, just, please. I looked at Richard. He gave me a small nod. I think she's finally seen enough. I'll be there, I told her. She whispered, thank you, before hanging up. Neither of us moved for a second. Richard finally closed the binder. Do you trust this? I considered the question carefully. I trust that she's scared. And Daniel? I looked toward the window. He already knows he's losing control. Richard picked up his laptop. Then we don't have much time. The drive back to Walker Furniture felt surreal. Less than 24 hours earlier, security had escorted me out of the building I'd spent 4 decades creating. Now, employees stopped working the moment I walked through the front entrance. Some smiled, some nodded, others simply watched. The atmosphere had changed. Yesterday they looked away. Today they looked hopeful. Rumors had spread overnight. People knew something was happening. No one knew what. Emily's assistant stood as soon as she saw me. "She's waiting for you." No smile, no small talk, just relief. Emily's office door was already open. She was standing by the window with her back to me. When she heard the door close, she turned. She looked exhausted, not because she'd lost sleep, because she'd lost certainty. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. Did I make a terrible mistake? There it was, not an excuse, not a defense, a question. I studied her face before answering. What changed? Without speaking, she walked to her desk and handed me a thick folder. I found these. Inside were invoices, consulting fees, private travel expenses, meeting summaries, hotel bills. Every one of them authorized by Daniel. Everyone connected to Horizon National Furnishings. Months before Emily had approved any negotiations, her voice trembled. He told me they were preliminary discussions. I slowly closed the folder. They weren't. She nodded. I know. Tears filled her eyes. I kept asking why he always wanted meetings without you. She laughed bitterly. He always had an answer. He usually does. I asked why so many reports bypassed accounting. What did he say? That experienced executives handled sensitive information differently. She looked ashamed. I believed him. I reached across the desk and covered her trembling hand with mine. So did everyone else. She shook her head. No. You didn't. I smiled sadly. No. I trusted your father. The words broke something inside her. She lowered her head. I should have listened. You should have asked more questions. Fresh tears slipped down her cheeks. I fired my own mother. You fired the person he wanted out of the way. She looked up. You still won't blame me. I blame the man who convinced you that love looked like weakness. She opened her mouth to speak. The office door slammed open. Daniel Mercer walked in without knocking. He stopped cold the moment he saw me. For the first time, his polished smile arrived a second too late. Emily. His voice remained smooth. We need to leave. She didn't move. We're talking. The shareholders are already gathering. They can wait. His eyes shifted toward me, then back to Emily. What did she tell you? Emily answered before I could. Enough. Daniel gave a short laugh. I think you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. No. She stood. I think they've finally cleared. Something flashed across his face. Not anger. Calculation. He looked around the office as though measuring every possible exit. Then he noticed the folder sitting open on the desk. His smile vanished. You searched my files. Emily met his eyes. I searched company records. Those documents are confidential. They're company property. They're being taken completely out of context. Before Emily could answer, another voice came from the doorway. I don't think a jury will agree. Richard. He stepped inside carrying the binder. Daniel turned sharply. What are you doing here? I'm representing my client. Daniel's confidence slipped another inch. Small, but noticeable. His right hand disappeared into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone and began typing. Fast, too fast. Richard noticed. So did I. Emily stepped between Daniel and the door. Who are you texting? No one. Show me. It's company business. She took another step. No. Her voice was calm. It's my company. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. The practiced smile returned. "You've become emotional." Emily didn't flinch. My mother stayed calm while I fired her. The words hit him harder than she intended. She continued, "You lied to me. I advised you. You manipulated me. I protected you. You used me." The room went silent. Daniel looked from Emily to Richard to me. His eyes kept moving, searching, calculating, looking for the one person he could still control. He didn't find one. Richard calmly checked his watch. They should be arriving any minute. Daniel frowned. "Who?" "The investigators." Silence. Daniel actually laughed. "What investigators?" Richard held up his phone. "The Financial Crimes Division. I forwarded every recovered server backup this morning." The smile disappeared. This time, it didn't come back. Daniel's phone vibrated inside his pocket. He looked at the screen. The color drained from his face. He didn't say a word. He simply turned. And ran. Emily stared after him. "What is he doing?" I walked to the office window overlooking the parking lot. "You'll see." 3 unmarked police vehicles rolled through the front gate. They moved without sirens, without urgency, like people who already knew their suspect wasn't going anywhere. Daniel burst through the rear entrance and sprinted toward his car. He never reached it. 2 detectives stepped into his path. A third calmly held up a badge. Daniel stopped so suddenly he nearly lost his balance. One detective spoke quietly. Another reached for the handcuffs. Daniel glanced toward the building, toward the office window, toward us. For just a second, our eyes met. The man who always had another answer had finally run out of them. For several seconds, no one inside the office moved. Every employee gathered along the windows watched in stunned silence as detectives led Daniel Mercer toward the waiting vehicle. The man who had walked through Walker Furniture as though he owned it. Now couldn't even reach his own car. Emily pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. "I can't believe I trusted him." I looked at her reflection in the glass. "You trusted someone who knew exactly what you wanted to hear." She slowly shook her head. "I trusted someone who told me I wasn't enough." Those words caught me off guard. She turned toward me, tears spilling freely now. "He kept saying Dad built the company. You built the company. And if I didn't make bold decisions, I'd always be living in your shadow." Her voice broke. "I wanted to prove I deserved this. You never had to prove that to me. But I thought I did." The years between us suddenly felt painfully small. Before I could answer, Richard closed the blinds. "We don't have much time." Emily wiped her eyes. "The shareholders." Richard nodded. "They're already gathering in the conference room." She looked toward the hallway. "After everything that's happened, they still expect a vote." Richard picked up his binder. "And unless we stop it, Horizon still gets the company." Emily inhaled slowly. "Then let's end this." The walk down the hallway felt different from the one I'd taken the day before. Yesterday, people avoided my eyes. Today, employees stepped aside. Several quietly wished me good luck. One elderly machinist reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You built this place," he whispered. "Don't let them take it." I smiled. "I don't intend to." Word spread ahead of us. Doors opened, heads turned, conversations stopped. Everyone sensed they were about to witness something that would be talked about inside Walker Furniture for years. When we reached the conference room, the door stood open. Nearly every seat was filled. Board members, major shareholders, department heads, several longtime investors. Dozens of conversations echoed through the room, until Emily walked in beside me. Silence. Every face turned. Some looked relieved. Others looked completely confused. A few immediately searched the room for Daniel. His chair sat empty. One director leaned toward another. "Where's Mercer?" No one answered. Richard quietly took his place beside the corporate secretary. Emily remained standing. She didn't take the CEO's chair. Instead, she faced everyone in the room. She drew one slow breath. "I need everyone's attention." The whispers faded, then disappeared. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of people who had trusted her, people she'd led, people she'd failed. When I accepted the role of CEO, she paused. I believed making difficult decisions meant making fast decisions. No one interrupted. I believed confidence was more important than questions. Another pause. I was wrong. Several directors exchanged surprised glances. I allowed someone to convince me that selling this company was the only way to save it. She looked at me. And I allowed that same person to convince me that the greatest threat to Walker Furniture, her voice cracked, was my own mother. No one spoke. The confession hung over the room. Heavy, painful, honest. Emily swallowed hard. I fired the woman who spent 42 years building everything we profit from today. She lowered her head. There isn't a single excuse that makes that acceptable. Across the table, an older shareholder slowly removed his glasses. He had known Thomas and me from the very beginning. His eyes glistened. Richard stood. Without saying a word, he began placing thick packets in front of every board member. The only sound in the room was paper sliding across polished wood. "What are these?" someone asked. "Recovered company records," Richard replied. "Certified server backups." People began turning pages. Expressions changed almost immediately. Curiosity, confusion, disbelief. One investor frowned. Another whispered, "This can't be real." Richard spoke calmly. "It is." He waited until everyone had reached the highlighted emails. Daniel Mercer concealed negotiations with Horizon National Furnishings. He turned another page. He accepted promises of personal financial gain. Another. He intentionally withheld material information from both the board. His eyes moved toward Emily. "And from your chief executive officer." Emily closed her eyes. "I never saw any of this." "I know," Richard said quietly. The room remained silent. Then one board member looked directly at Emily. "Did you authorize any of these negotiations?" "No." "Did you know he had already discussed executive compensation after the sale?" She stared at the document. "No." Another director spoke. "Did he ever tell you, Mrs. Walker still owned additional voting shares?" Emily looked confused. "What?" The room shifted. Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch. Every eye turned toward him, then toward me. Richard folded his hands. "No, he never told her." One shareholder leaned forward. "What additional shares?" Richard looked at me for permission. I gave a small nod. He turned back to the room. Years ago, before his death, Thomas Walker legally transferred additional voting shares to Mrs. Walker. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Those transfers were recorded. They were legal, and until recently, they remained private. Emily slowly turned toward me. "You never told me." "I never needed to." Her expression filled with regret. I know what you thought. I thought I controlled the company. You controlled the responsibility." I smiled sadly. Not the future. Before anyone could speak again, the chairman cleared his throat. "We still have a meeting to conduct." The room settled. Business had to continue, even after Betrayal. He adjusted the agenda. "The proposed sale of Walker Furniture remains before this board." His eyes moved toward Emily. "As Chief Executive Officer." He paused. "How do you wish to proceed?" Emily stood a little straighter. Yesterday she had sounded rehearsed. Today, she sounded like herself. "I withdraw my support." A wave of whispers rolled across the room. One investor immediately stood. "You can't simply reverse your position overnight." Emily met his gaze. "I can. I was deceived." And I won't ask anyone else to continue being deceived with me. The investor sat back down. The chairman nodded once. Very well. He looked around the room. Without the CEO's recommendation, the vote becomes considerably closer. One board member quietly flipped through the shareholder register. He frowned. Even so, he looked up. There may still be enough votes to approve the sale. Richard smiled for the first time all morning. I don't believe there are. The room fell silent again. He turned toward me. Mrs. Walker. Every eye followed his. Slowly. I reached into my purse. Inside was the same worn envelope Thomas had left behind. The edges had yellowed with age. The seal had already been broken. Yet somehow, holding it still felt like opening it for the first time. I carried it to the front of the room. For a brief moment I could almost feel Thomas standing beside me, steady, calm, certain, as though he'd planned for this day long before either of us imagined it would come. I handed the envelope to Richard. He carefully removed the original stock certificates. The room became so quiet that I could hear paper unfolding between his fingers. He passed the certificates to the chairman. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Read the numbers. Stopped. Read them again. His eyebrows slowly rose. He counted once more, then looked toward the corporate secretary. I'd like these verified immediately. She accepted the certificates with careful hands. One by one, she compared them against the official shareholder ledger. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Every second stretched longer than the last. Emily stood frozen, watching, waiting, hoping. Finally, the corporate secretary looked up. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. They're authentic, she swallowed. Every certificate. Another pause. Then the words that changed everything. Mrs. Walker holds the final controlling voting shares of Walker Furniture. The room exploded. People spoke over one another. That's impossible. When were these issued? How did no one know? The chairman struck the gavel twice. Order. Gradually, the voices faded. Richard calmly addressed the room. The transfers were executed legally years ago by Thomas Walker. They remained confidential under attorney-client privilege until today. The chairman slowly turned toward me. His expression carried equal parts surprise and respect. Mrs. Walker, he paused. The deciding vote now belongs to you. Every pair of eyes in the room settled on me. No one breathed. No one moved. And for the first time since Emily slid that white envelope across the table, the future of Walker Furniture rested exactly where my husband had always intended it to. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. Every face was turned toward me. Board members, investors, employees standing along the walls. Even Emily, especially Emily. She wasn't looking at the stock certificates anymore. She was looking at me, waiting, hoping, afraid. The chairman folded his hands. Mrs. Walker. His voice broke the silence without disturbing it. You hold the controlling interest in Walker Furniture. He glanced at the voting register. Your decision determines the outcome. For a long moment, I said nothing. Not because I didn't know how I would vote. Because 42 years of memories deserved more than a rushed answer. I looked around the conference room, the same room where my daughter had fired me less than 48 hours earlier. The same room where Thomas and I had once celebrated our first $1 million contract. The same room where we'd laughed, argued, planned expansions, survived recessions, and promised each other that if we ever succeeded, we would never forget the people who made that success possible. Faces from the past filled my mind. The carpenter who delayed retirement so we could train apprentices, the single mother who worked double shifts until both her children graduated college, the delivery driver who never missed a Christmas Eve because he wanted every family to receive their furniture before the holidays. Walker Furniture had never been a building. It had always been people. I slowly looked toward Emily. She stood perfectly still. No confidence, no pride, no excuses, only regret. She wasn't asking me to save her. She was praying I wouldn't let her mistake destroy everyone else. I finally spoke. I vote. Every eye widened to reject the sale. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the chairman struck the gavel. The motion fails. The sound echoed through the conference room like a door slamming shut on everything Daniel Mercer had planned. A collective breath swept across the room. Several longtime employees wiped tears from their eyes. One board member started clapping. Another joined him. Within seconds, the applause spread around the room. Not loud, not triumphant, grateful. No one celebrated because someone had won. They celebrated because something precious had survived. Across the table, one elderly investor stood. He looked at me with watery eyes. "Your husband would have been proud today." I smiled. "So would yours." The room slowly relaxed. Conversations began again. This time, they sounded hopeful. The chairman waited for the applause to fade. "There's one final matter." Everyone looked back toward him. "In light of today's evidence," he nodded toward Richard, "I move that every agreement negotiated by Daniel Mercer be suspended immediately pending criminal investigation." "I second," another director answered without hesitation. "So do I. So do I." One voice after another filled the room. Not a single objection. The motion passed unanimously. Richard quietly closed his binder. "For the record," he said, "the Financial Crimes Division has already taken possession of the recovered server backups." One shareholder frowned. "What happens now?" Richard answered calmly. "That depends on how much investigators uncover." He paused. "But based on what we've already found," his expression hardened. "I suspect this wasn't his first company." A murmur swept through the room. One director leaned back. "My God." Another quietly whispered, "We almost handed him everything." Emily lowered her head. "No." Her voice was barely audible. "I almost handed it to him." Nobody corrected her. Nobody blamed her either. The silence was punishment enough. As the meeting officially adjourned, people slowly gathered their papers. Groups formed around the room. Some discussed the vote. Others spoke quietly about Daniel's arrest. Several longtime employees came over simply to shake my hand, one after another. "Welcome back. We're glad you're here. We never stopped believing in you." Each one meant more than they probably realized. Eventually, the conference room emptied. Only 3 people remained: Richard, Emily, and me. Richard looked between us. "I think my work here is finished." I smiled. "You've earned a long vacation," he laughed softly. "I'll settle for 8 hours of sleep." Before leaving, he stopped beside Emily. "Your father trusted your instincts." She looked down. "I stopped trusting them." "You don't lose good instincts." He smiled gently. "You just stop listening to them." Then he quietly walked out, closing the door behind him. The room suddenly felt much larger. Emily remained where she stood. She looked as though she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she crossed the room. Slowly, carefully. Like someone approaching a bridge she wasn't sure would still hold her weight. When she reached me, she stopped. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Nothing rehearsed, nothing polished. Just truth. "I know." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No." She closed her eyes. "I don't. But forgiveness isn't earned." She looked up. "It's given." Her shoulders began to shake. "I let him turn me against you." "I know. I questioned everything you taught me." "I know. I humiliated you." "I know." Each answer seemed to make her cry harder. Finally, she whispered, "How do we come back from this?" I looked around the conference room one last time. Less than 2 days ago, she had stood in this very room and ordered security to escort me out. Now she was standing in exactly the same place, asking me how to repair what she'd broken. Trust isn't rebuilt in conversations. She nodded silently. It's rebuilt in choices. One choice, then another, day after day, until people stop remembering the apology. And start believing the person. She wiped away her tears. I'll spend however long it takes. I know you will. For the first time since all this began. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly. Not because everything had been fixed. Because it hadn't. Some wounds don't disappear. They heal slowly, and only if both people are willing to do the work. After a long moment, she whispered, I missed you. I smiled through my own tears. I never went anywhere. Outside the conference room windows, employees had already returned to work. Forklifts rolled across the warehouse floor. Machines hummed back to life. Laughter drifted through the hallway. Walker Furniture wasn't standing because one vote had saved it. It was standing because hundreds of ordinary people had refused to let one dishonest man destroy what generations had built. As Emily and I walked out of the conference room together, conversation stopped once again. This time, no one looked away. One by one, employees smiled. Some even applauded quietly. Not for either of us. For the family they hoped had finally found its way back. And for the first time since Thomas was gone. Walking through those factory doors didn't feel like returning to work. It felt like coming home.